Hello and welcome to another entry in the Astrologer's Encyclopedia. My name is Matt. Thank you so much for joining me as always. Today we have part two of delineating planets in the chart of LeBron James, and we're going to be using this same method that we've been using for the last video that I described 2 videos ago, which I took from Demetra George's Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice, Volume 2, Chapter 79. So basically all we're doing is it's 4 steps. We say, what's the planet? What's the sign? What's the house? What's the condition? And we are very specific in sort of pulling apart each piece. And what it helps us do is get clear, concise delineations that ideally in like a reading, or if you're reading for your own chart, you can look at a planet and get like a little paragraph that describes, what that planet's all about, what kind of circumstances it's going to give a person in their life. And then we can look at, as we're going to in this talk, we're going to look at a couple times through perfections mostly that these planets are activated. So we can take this sort of like archetypal general statement of the planet and see what happens when it's actually activated. And so the reason that I like to do this is that a lot of astrologers, I think myself included, they really like to get complicated. They really like to bring in all these different things. And it also can be very overwhelming when we have like, okay, Jupiter's in Capricorn, but it's under the beams, but it's square Mars, but it's got a trine from Venus, all these kinds of things, whatever, that can never happen. But we have all these factors and it's kind of like, how do we put them all together, right? And so what Demetra's book does, and what this little snippet of her book does in particular, is it makes you kind of slow down and define each thing as you go, and then you can put it all together. And it helps you get something that's actually correct and accurate, rather than something that's kind of vague and like stereotypical and like cliched. So let's just get right into it. So I said, this method, there's 4 steps. What are the natural characteristics of the planet and what is its personality? That's step 1. Should have a question mark there. I just copied the slide from last time and left a typo in. But so basically, let's say we have Jupiter sitting in front of us and we're going to talk about Jupiter. What is Jupiter all about? What does he signify in life? Imagine Jupiter sitting in front of you. What kind of person is he? What kind of clothes is he wearing? What's like what does he want to do if you guys are going to hang out? What's he going to give you? What's he bringing into the room? What's his house like? You can get really creative in getting a fully fleshed sort of character about these planets. But in a sentence or two, what does this planet signify? What is it trying to bring into the native's life? Step 2 is, what are the specific qualities of its sign placement? So gender, modality, and element. And how are these expressed? So we take what the planet's trying to do, the sort of environment that it's in, the clothes it's wearing, the arena that it has to act in, right? How is it affected by that? And then step 3 is, what are the topics of the house that the planet falls in? The planet will use these topics to express its significations. So again, very straightforward. Each house has a couple of significations, like very straightforward. And then step 4 is, what is the overall condition of the planet? Consider essential dignity, quality of the house, aspects, retrogradation, etc. Right. So this is where things get a little bit more complicated, and we have to pare it back a little bit and take it step by step. So very simple, and I promise you, if you follow this and if you like know the planets and the houses and the signs and different conditions well enough, you'll get something that's pretty kind of like shockingly accurate for something that is so simple. So in the last video, we did, what did we do? We did the Moon, Mercury, and Venus. And then in the video before, where I first outlined the technique, I did Mars. So we're going to skip Mars today. We're going to do the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. So step 1, what is the Sun's agenda? So this is something that I've written here. As the fiery king of the heavens, the Sun grants authority, the quality of the mind, the quality of the soul, having great influence, and it has great influence over the path of the native's life. Adam Ellenboss says that the Sun gives the plot line of the life. So the Sun, kind of like, what's this life all about? Schmidt will say, what distinguishes the native? What is kind of select about the native? So like, if we're talking about someone's biography, there's going to be certain things that like shine forth or are unique to that individual, right? So that can be related in a lot of ways to the Sun, like what is visible about the life, what is distinct. So that's the Sun, right? It's always going to be the same in every single chart. Step 2, what are the qualities of the sign? Capricorn is feminine, earthy, immovable, or cardinal. So femininity, according to Demetra George, gives slowness and a sort of lack of urgency. So the planets in feminine signs will develop slowly over the course of life. They might have like a less success early on, but kind of grow into themselves as things go on. There's less like pressure for them to get moving. Earth gives a steady, matter-of-fact nature, and cardinality gives starts and stops and sudden changes of direction. So just to put that all together, we have the sun in Capricorn distinguishes the life, right? So something unique about the life, something special, something significant. Sun in Capricorn distinguishes the life through steady, adaptable practicality and builds long-lasting authority through controlled experimentation and incremental development. So we have this steady, adaptable practicality. That would be Earth, and also the femininity. Long-lasting authority, again, would be, authority is another solar word, but again, be the femininity and the earthiness, and controlled experimentation and incremental development would be the cardinality. So step 3, what are the topics of the house? The 8th house is related to, in Demetra George's words, death, inheritance, the spouse's money, fear, and anguish. So that will be the place that the sun is most noticeable, right? Step 4, what is the condition of the planet? The sun here is in what I would say is a decent to poor condition. The sun is not in the best condition, but it could certainly be worse. The sun is of sect. It's the leader of the sect. It has good aspects with both malefics. So that's kind of like a neutral factor, right? It's just kind of not bad, right? Although the sextile with Saturn is quite nice. If I can just get my pen. So we see sextile with Saturn and also a sextile with Mars. So mainly my point here is that the sun is not being harmed by the malefics. If the sun were being harmed by malefics, it would bring like slander, injuries, violence, that kind of a thing. Good aspects with both malefics. It's co-present with the fallen benefic of sect. It's still good for the sun, but it will bring sort of limitations. It has a square with the moon, which is going to be interesting as well. We'll get to this on the next slide. So finally, the sun is in a bad house. So really, I'm going to give the sun like a C or a C+, mostly due to the house placement. The 8th house is not a good house, but it's brought up somewhat significantly by the co-presence of Jupiter and by the reception with its ruler. So to boil all this down into one delineation, we can say the sun in Capricorn gives the native a steady, practical nature. His life is distinguished by the native's ability to persistently adapt to new circumstances and adopt new skills. So that would be the cardinality, right? His ability to change directions and adopt this like down-to-earth approach. His co-presence with Jupiter allows the native to be victorious and noble. So those are Jupiterian words as well as kind of solar words, but Jupiter offers success, honors, high rank, right? And so by being present with the sun, Jupiter allows the life, right, to sort of take on those qualities, though his fallen status may diminish this somewhat. His presence in the 8th paves the way for financial entanglements and benefits from death due to the co-presence of the benefic of sect. So again, Jupiter is bringing the better side of the topics of the 8th house to the sun, although again, the fallen nature of it makes it not as positive as it maybe could be. And we'll see in how this plays out, like how that plays out. His square with the moon suggests that his goals and aspirations, solar words, the course of his life, the plot of his life, are at times out of sync with the actual conditions of his life, signified by the moon. So there's this pressure on like the actual conditions of his life where he has these aspirations, these ambitions, and this like plan for his life, like where he wants it to go, that sometimes is at odds with the actual like materiality of his life, signified by the moon. So I have a couple times here where the sun is activated as ruler of the year, also I think as ruler of the month for maybe one of them. So first is when he goes to St. Vincent St. Mary in 1999. This is the high school that he goes to. There's a whole documentary about his high school experience. It's really good, called More Than a Game, I think. I watched it a couple weeks ago. But basically, he starts high school in 1999 during a Leo year, during a 3rd house year. And he attends this private, mostly white school, Catholic school, And this was kind of a controversial decision at the time. Like a lot of people wanted him to go to the public school and play basketball there, but he goes with his three friends, and they nicknamed themselves the Fab Four. And they sort of bind themselves together, and they all go to this high school together, which is could be kind of an eighth house topic as well, where he's using the resources of others in a way that is helps him achieve victory, honor, status, that kind of thing. So, and this is also where, Jupiter here as like a religious planet, signifying that kind of a thing, is giving the sun access to, a Catholic school that is wealthier, that has more resources, but is also, he takes some flack from his community for making this decision. And it's not seen in a strictly positive light. So the next thing I have is a couple years later, when he's a senior, so this is during the Sagittarius year, he's suspended. He's deemed ineligible by the Ohio high school basketball sports association, whatever, for accepting 2 throwback jerseys worth $845 and for posing for photos at a store. So they consider this to be him taking money, him having endorsements almost, which is not acceptable for amateur athletes, right? You don't want high school kids being paid by people for playing basketball. So this organization says, right? And so he's able to appeal the decision, and he only missed 2 games. He scored 52 points in his first game back. So here we have, it's the Jupiter year, but the sun is activated by the month. And so this is a really good example of where Jupiter is able to get him out of trouble, but he's also, receiving some kind of negative feedback from the world, right? So he's being given gifts, which again is a Jupiterian thing. It's an 8th house thing, like the resources of others. He's receiving something from somebody else, and he's punished for it. He's seen in a negative light, and he's saying this is insane. This is insane. I didn't do anything. And because Jupiter is of sect and it's a benefic, it's able to be overturned, and he comes back to thunderous applause, great success, all this kind of thing. And I can't remember if they end up winning the high school championship this year. I can't remember. I watched the video or the movie not that long ago, but so that's a really good example of Jupiter ends up getting him out of it, right? These 8th house situations, these entanglements materially with and financially with others. But it's not perfect. It's given to him with some kind of struggle or with some kind of delay, right? In Saturn sign, that kind of a thing. So his first year in Miami, he has this so-called villain arc, and then he loses in the finals. So he makes the decision to go to Miami during the Cancer year with the moon in the 11th. And we talked about that last video where he has this, he's reaching up towards a championship, right? With the fiery nature of the sign to join the Heat Martian team, right? And so then in the next year, the sun is activated. And this is halfway through the season. His birthday is December 30th. So it's almost halfway through the season. And he switches into the sun year, and he's upset by the Dallas Mavericks in the finals, and he's playing with this angry demeanor. So he's, the sun in Capricorn can be kind of grouchy. It can be maybe a little selfish. It can be seen in a negative light, that kind of a thing. And so we see Jupiter here. He's on this great team. He's playing relatively well, but he loses. He's upset by this other team. He almost gets the high honor, but then it's taken away from him. And this, again, is Jupiter in a fallen sign. Jupiter is not able to give sort of the full measure of his beneficence in this circumstance. So the next, and this is also kind of interesting too, where we see the femininity of the sign, where early on in life, this is relatively early in his career, we see he's moving up, but he's not quite at the peak, right? He's not winning all the time. He's not, his reputation is cloudy at this point. It's actually really bad. And so there's a square between the decision that he made last year to join this team and his ability to win this year, right? Interesting enough. And then the next year we get to Mercury, and he does win the finals with the trine to the moon. So then we get to this year. So right now he's actually in a Leo year. knock something over. So this year, he just went into a Leo year, so at the end of 2022. And then on February 7th of this year, he passes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's all-time scoring record, and he's like going to blow it out of the water. Like he's probably going to end, the point record is like 38,000 something points. If he keeps going at his current pace, he'll get to like 45,000 points. So he's like smashing this record. And so it's a Leo year and a Virgo month. So basically we see, again, the second time that this sun year comes around, he's being given like almost the highest honor you can possibly be given. And it develops because he's so good, so consistently, and he's just been like steadily moving towards this thing. And, you know, at this point, his reputation is much better. He's not seen as a villain. He's seen as, you know, after he like went back to Cleveland, he won there, he went to LA, he won there. And so now he's sort of solidified his appearance, his reputation, his legacy. And this is like a crowning achievement, right? And so that would be, and it's also, you know, the ruler of the first is activated as well. Mercury, this planet that's skilled, has, you know, talent with sports and games, that kind of a thing. Especially with court sports, you'll hear that too. It's like things that go back and forth, like basketball. So this is the femininity, I think, also at play, where it's slower to develop, it's a little bit less urgent. And it's not saying that like LeBron personally, it doesn't have this urgency, but it's like the way the sun behaves in his life through circumstance is slow to develop, slow to unfold, slow to unravel, is not like bursting forth, you know, that kind of a thing. Even though from other things in his chart, we see that he was a star from a very young age. Like we see the moon in a fire sign, Mercury in a fire sign. There's like the thing that he's really going to be known for, I think, when all is said and done, is like all-time scoring leader, right? He's not always going to be known. Like the first thing you think of in 20 years when you think of LeBron is probably not going to be like, oh, everyone hated him for a couple of years. It's probably going to be, you know, he won 4 championships. We'll see if he wins another, but he won 4 championships and he's all-time scoring leader. And like maybe no one's ever going to break this record, that kind of thing, right? And it's because, and he's going to be remembered as this guy who was just so good for so long and just stayed that good, right? So, and there's also Saturnian too. It's not just the earthiness, the femininity, but you know, he's just this like keeps his head down and just keeps winning and doesn't slow down, right? And we'll get into that as we talk about Jupiter and Saturn as well. So now moving on to Jupiter. Step 1, what is Jupiter's agenda? Jupiter gives success, relief from troubles, magnificence, honors, dignity, higher knowledge, and can signify children as well. What is the nature of the sign? Capricorn is feminine, earthy, and movable. This is the same sign that we just talked about. So femininity gives slowness and a lack of urgency. Earthiness gives a steady, matter-of-fact, like practical sort of nature. Cardinality gives starts and stops and sudden changes of direction. Jupiter in Capricorn, this is just to boil all that down, gives honors and recognition for persistence and practicality. He gives lasting success and victory through grit and determination. So there we have the femininity, it's the persistence, it's the slowly building. The practicality is earth, and then the grit and determination, you know, you could say is the cardinality, but also the earthiness, and also it's all kind of wrapped up in there. So step 3, same 8th house, death, other people's money, other people's resources, fear, anguish, criticism, you could even say, which maybe I should have mentioned as the topic of the 8th house with when the sun was activated, was that, you know, he's playing with the sense of like of anguish. He's like being assaulted by people, by like jeering fans every night. And so he's like, right, I'm the villain, like I'm the bad guy, I'm going to play like it, I'm going to act like it, I'm going to feel like it. And this is like he said that, I'm not making that up. So step 4, what is the condition of this planet? So Jupiter, I think, is in the worst condition in this chart. Jupiter is in poor / mixed condition because there's some things that are going for it, but overall it's pretty negative. So he's of sect, he's co-present with the sect light, which is good, you could say, and he sees no bad aspects from the malefics, which again is good, or at least neutral at best, right? And he has an aspect with his host, which is always good. And we'll get to Saturn in a little bit. But he's fallen, he's in a bad house, and he's under the beams, which is like bad. Like that's pretty bad. So Jupiter is, again, he's not going to be able to offer the full strength of his victory and his status and his influence and his purity and his attractiveness and all of these kinds of things that Jupiter can be. And so I'm going to give him like a C minus. I kind of went back and forth on this, but I think a C minus is pretty good because there are certain things that are going for him, and he's especially his being of sect and like not having harmful aspects with the malefics. So I give Jupiter like a C minus, and we'll see on this next slide how that all kind of comes together. So Jupiter grants success and relief. That's the same in every chart. Relief from struggles through gritty determination, perseverance, and the ability to change direction when needed, right? So that's the femininity, the earthiness, and the cardinality. His presence in the 8th disposes the native to good outcomes, right? Because it's benefic, related to death, inheritance, and the spouse's resources. This is an area of life that is at least not publicized, but I don't know much about specifically like inheritances and that kind of thing. Although you could say, again, with that thing with like the jerseys and the endorsements and the all these kinds of things, he's like attracting the resources of others in a way. Being under the beams and fallen, the native's accomplishments may go unnoticed or be subject to unreasonable scrutiny and criticism. This, I think, is really important. So when planets are fallen, they have this sense of, maybe to start with, when planets are exalted, they're lifted up, they're honored, they're seen as good and proper and desirable, and the things that they produce are going to be having those attributes. When planets are fallen, they are ignored, they're rejected, they're scrutinized more heavily, they're like policed, you could even say. They are put down, unnoticed, rejected, denied, all these kind of marginalized, all these kinds of things are pushed outward and downward, where when things are exalted, they're brought inward and lifted upwards. And so if Jupiter's in Cancer, everything's like, wow, everything this person does is so great. We're going to bestow them with so much influence. We're going to listen to all their ideas. They're going to be a philosopher, all these kinds of things. When Jupiter's in Capricorn, we're going to reject this person's greatness. We're going to push it aside. We're going to deny it as long as possible. We're going to always argue against it, that kind of thing. So a couple of times when Jupiter was active is 2003. He's drafted into the NBA, first overall pick coming out of high school. And he's at this point, he's like, people are calling him like the chosen one. He's this savior type of figure almost. And he's in his home city. You know, he's from Akron, Ohio. He plays in Cleveland for the Cavaliers. And so he's this like hometown kid. Everyone's calling him like the kid from Akron, which we talked about last week, being related in a way to Mercury, where even late into his career, he's being recognized in a way for his youth, and he's being called the kid from Akron. He's like got this like humble origin story. And so Jupiter here is lifting him up into this team, and the team sucks. Like they're just terrible. And so it's this really great story, but it's like the first years of his career are like not good. Like it takes him a couple of years to get to the playoffs. It takes him a couple of years to, the front office of Cleveland never really puts a good team around him in his first stint there. And so he's being lifted up, but he's being lifted up to a team that's like terrible and doesn't win, and actually ends really poorly his first stint in Cleveland. And so we see here a couple of things. One, specifically with Jupiter, we talked about this actually a lot in my perfections example video. But one thing that's really interesting is Jupiter, again, this planet that grants boons and benefits and relief from struggles and uplifts things and makes them grand and noble and inspired and all that kind of thing, is trining the ruler of the first. And so he's being put on this huge pedestal for his skill with basketball, for his personality, for his youth, right? And then we also see Venus as the ruler of the month, and Venus is here in the first with Mercury. Mercury's right on the ascendant. All these kinds of things. And then Mars here with Uranus also on the midheaven. He's being celebrated for his ability to play sports. Interesting enough, also Jupiter is the ruler of the 10th, so Jupiter will bring in matters of career and reputation, more specifically than even usual, into the 8th house, and just in this chart he will signify those things even more so. So this again is a really good example of where Jupiter is like giving him really good things, but there's a way in which they're incomplete, or they are bounded or restricted in some way, or they are incomplete, I think is a good word, where again, he's being lifted up. He's the chosen one, but he's the chosen one in this team that like sucks. And he can only take it so far with that team, right? So he ends up going to the playoffs for like 4 or 5 years, but he never gets super far. I think he does get to the finals once with them. but he doesn't win, and it's really kind of this like bitter ending, right? Bitter being a Saturnian word, Jupiter in Saturn sign. So next we have the All-Star Game MVP and his first playoff appearances in 2006. So this is his third year in the league, or maybe it's 2004. So yeah, it's his third year in the league. And so he wins the All-Star Game MVP. He's given this grand honor, and this again is something that we talked about in the Perfections example video. And he leads the Cavs to their first playoff appearance since 1998, and he gets knocked out in like I think the second round. So again, he's being lifted up and he's being honored and he's being given all these awards, right? With Jupiter, he's being given like tokens of appreciation, gifts, or like raining down upon him. And he leads his team to success, but doesn't sort of finish the job. And by this point, or maybe not so much by this point, but he's criticized for that. He's saying like, they could have gone further, all these kinds of things. And it's the beginning of this period in his career where everyone's like, yeah, he's really good, but right, he doesn't win a championship, but all these kinds of things. This is kind of when that phase starts. And this is a Pisces year, so a 10th house year. So this is his first season back in Cleveland, which I think is 2014. So, or it would have been the end of 2014. He entered this year. So first season back in Cleveland and finals loss. So he returns to Cleveland. He returns home to this place where he started. Returns to the team that is not quite as good as the one that he just left, or the one that he went to Miami for. And he plays the Warriors, and they lose in the finals due to injuries involving his teammates, his two sort of co-stars, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. And so again, we see here when Jupiter is in charge, when Jupiter is giving him things, he's giving him like almost victory, right? He's trying to give him a win. He's trying to give him a championship, but the resources of others, the resources of his teammates bodies, his teammates' labor, his teammates' time, energy, all these kinds of things are not available. They're fallen. And he ends up losing, basically. So I think that's really the thing with Jupiter is, and this is where you can see like, yes, Jupiter is a benefic, but if Jupiter is not in a position to be giving really good things, he's going to try to give them, but he's not going to be able to. And we see this again and again where LeBron loses championships. And like, if we think of going back to the sun and sort of bringing that into his legacy in a lot of ways is going to be like, yeah, 4 and 6. Like he went to 10 NBA finals. He was in the finals all the time, but he only won 4. People would be like, he's not Jordan. He didn't three-peat twice, that kind of thing. He didn't win 6. People just be like, oh, LeBron's the GOAT. And people just say 6 rings, right? Because Jordan had 6 rings. And LeBron didn't win. He's like individually maybe in a way better. And a lot of people will agree on that, but then they'll say, but he didn't win. He didn't achieve that sort of highest honor, that highest victory, which is the responsibility in a way of Jupiter to give, right? Especially when he's co-present with the sun, especially when he's ruling the 10th, right? And we saw this too with Mars, where Mars is in the 10th, so Mars is bringing slander and disrepute to his career, to his reputation, to his image, right? And so people are, first of all, he's being seen as a Martian character, as an athlete, but then people are just like, he should have done better. He didn't go all the way. He didn't win enough. He didn't. And there's this way where people just like rip him down. People like don't want him to be the best, almost, you could say. There's this big resistance in a way to sort of recognizing his actual achievement in the way that I see this conversation. And so that's like a really good encapsulation of like a debilitated Jupiter. Is there's this greatness that is, and this achievement that is either incomplete or rejected or denied or stripped, that kind of a thing. So finally, we have Saturn in Scorpio. So what is Saturn's agenda? Saturn gives struggles, hardships, grief, slander, disrepute. Saturn can signify old things and, quoting Demetra George, help from ancient and obsolete things and older persons. When well disposed, and this is again from Demetra George, Saturn grants the power to oppress and subordinate, which is interesting, and gain at the expense of others. So like sometimes you'll see Saturn being associated with landlords and like people who own property but don't do the labor themselves. as well as with the laborers. It's kind of interesting. Saturn has this dual quality, which in a way is kind of similar to Mercury, but is different in a way as well. But that, I guess, is beside the point. So 2, what is the nature of the sign? Scorpio is feminine, fixed, and watery. Femininity gives slow development and a lack of urgency. So again, it's this things that develop slowly over time, things that aren't going to be jumping out of life from the beginning, things that will develop over time. Watery signs are, from Demetra George, dependent on the actions of others, and they adopt the shape of their container. So they are sort of flexible in this way. They are relative to others. They're reaching, or they're like pulling things in and combining things and blending things and that kind of thing. And fixed signs give stability, focus, and longevity. So Saturn in Scorpio gives slowly developing struggles that are dependent on the actions and relationships the native has with others. Saturn gives the ability to dominate and subordinate others through sustained martial force, Mars is sign Scorpio, and obsessive attention to detail. That's the fixed sign. And there's kind of, you could even say that like fixed water is like water that stays in one container. It stays in one form, stays in one place, and in a way doesn't change. So step 3, what are the topics of the house? The 6th house is associated with labors, injuries, illness, and wayward travel. So like wanderings and travel that's sort of unintentional or dangerous, right? And so we have to think of this in the way that people would have thought of travel 2,000 years ago as not like this fun vacation thing, but it's like this absolutely perilous thing that you like have to do. Like all of the significations for travel in the Greek text are like horribly malefic. And so, travel is associated with injury, with like starving, with being out in the elements, with being attacked by bandits, all that kind of a thing. And so, one thing that I'll say, just as a quick note, is that all of, especially the 6th and the 12th, but also the 8th and the 2nd, are blind to the 1st. This is a huge reason why they're bad, why they're negative houses. And it's because the line of sight of the 1st house does not encompass them. So the 1st house, all of the good houses, you'll notice, are visible by aspect to the 1st. And so there's a way that like the 6th house, so if you think of like an injury, it's this thing that comes out of nowhere. You don't plan for it, and it like intrudes upon you and burdens you. And same thing with the 12th house. If the 12th house is like imprisonment, confinement, isolation, depression, mental struggles, that kind of a thing. It's something that you don't like plan for and you don't desire usually. And it intrudes on your life and it imposes itself upon you. And so that's part of the reason why they're bad. And so that would be the 6th house being injuries. Again, wayward travel, exile can be associated with the 6th as well. Slavery, traditionally, right? That kind of a thing. So step 4, what is the condition of the planet? Saturn is in decent, I would maybe say good. I don't think I would go that far. I went back and forth on this quite a bit, but I would say decent to like moderately good condition, better than perhaps at first appearance. So the pros for Saturn is he's of sect, he's conjunct the south node, which in the case of him being a malefic is good. The north node will increase whatever's there, so it will increase beneficence, but also maleficence, and the south node will decrease whatever's there, increase or decrease beneficence, but also decrease maleficence. Has a trine with its host, and is enclosed by the benefics, by the benefits. And so enclosure, I also have a video on this, on the conditions of bonification and maltreatment. One of them is that if the 2 benefics or 2 malefics are bodily present or by casting rays, sort of surround the planet. So we see here that Jupiter's ray goes to 21 Scorpio, Venus's goes to 25. So Saturn is enclosed. So we see that Mars's ray would go to 4, the sun would go to 9, and the moon and Mercury don't see Saturn. So Saturn is this planet, which is normally disposed, especially in the 6th house, is normally disposed to cause harm and injury, right? But because it is enclosed by the benefics, it's going to be unable or significantly less able to do that, which is very interesting and highly, highly relevant. And it makes also the sun and Jupiter, it puts them in much better condition because their host is not as bad as it could be if it was in the 6th. So It's actually a condition of maltreatment that the Sun and Jupiter are here in Saturn's sign, a malefic, and he's in the sixth. But this is mitigated significantly by enclosure, and we'll see this as we go forward. So I'm going to give Saturn like a B overall, mostly because of the enclosure and also the south node and being a sect. So like really the only thing that Saturn has going against it is the bad house and the being ruled by the malefic contrary to sect. But again, it's a trine. It can see it, unlike the moon, as from last video we were talking about, the moon brings, by being ruled by the malefic of sect or contrary to sect, and being in averse to that planet gives much worse outcomes for the moon, right? As we talked about in the last video. But because there's a line of sight between Mars and Saturn, Mars can more diligently and ably attend to the matters of this house, which again are injury, health, sickness, travel, right? And it's relevant too when we talk about Venus. As part of the reason that Venus is maltreated is because of the relationship, the square with Saturn, and part of it was right because his marriage might suffer a little bit because he's traveling all the time. He's on the road, and it's harsh on his health. Right? So, boiling this all down, I'm going to give Saturn like a B, and this is what I wrote for my delineation. Saturn in Scorpio in the sixth gives injuries and ailments that are slow to develop and constantly, or you could say consistently, plague the native, right? Because they're fixed. His co-presence with the south node and enclosure by the benefics reduces his ability to produce bad outcomes for the native, allowing him to sustain himself in martial Scorpio activities ruled by Mars with extreme longevity, right? That's another Saturnian thing, is things that age, things that are old, things that endure with time, right? And it's also worth noting that both Jupiter and the Sun, the planets that give honor, reputation, are ruled by Saturn as well. So he's sort of bringing those things with him. His ability to manage his health and ward off injury allows him to subordinate others and prosper in his career. So what is winning in a sports game? You're subordinating someone else. You're dominating them. You're winning. You're benefiting from their loss, right? And same thing with Mars. Mars in the 10th, when Mars is well placed, as it relatively is in this chart, gives conquest, right? It's the other person or other group suffering because you've beaten them, you've destroyed them, you've killed them, quote unquote, right? You've eliminated them from the playoffs. You've beaten them, right? Dominated them, right? These are all Martian words. So when does Saturn show up? Saturn return when he, 27 to 30, when Saturn was in Scorpio. This is October 2012 to September 2015. And so he's in two. I thought this was like fascinating. He's in two finals at this point, and they're both against the San Antonio Spurs. And so they're like star players, Tim Duncan, who've been in the league forever at this point, and he's like, they call him the big fundamental. And he's, people will say, I love Tim Duncan, but people say he's like the most boring player to watch because he's just got no flair. He's just like bare bones, putting the ball in the hoop, passing when he needs to, and he just wins because of it. He's got no style, right? He's quiet, he's reserved, he's very Saturnian. And they're also led by this legendary, and at this point has been their coach for like 15 years, Greg Popovich, who is like this just absolutely legendary NBA coach. So they play them back to back. They win the first time, they lose the second time. But I just thought that was very interesting. When Saturn is activated in this way, he's sort of confronting Saturn, and he's establishing his reputation and his skill, and he's attempting to like dominate Saturn, right? And he's fairly successful at it. He's not absolutely dominant, but he's pretty good. He wins one time, loses the next time. So at this time also he marries his high school sweetheart Savannah Brinson in September 2013. So this again is Saturn squaring down on Venus, which again, because Saturn is in a good condition here relative to how he could be in the sixth house, it produces a good outcome. It doesn't produce heartbreak and divorce. It produces marriage. And again, as I said last time, their marriage seems to be happy, but has almost this like business as air to it, where he's describing her as like running the household. She's really engaged in like charity work, and they have like a school in Akron that they run, and she, I think, does a lot of like the administration of that. So just worth noting. And then in 2014, he misses 2 weeks for a knee injury, which Saturn can be related to like ligaments, joints, the knees, that kind of a thing. And at this point, it's his longest injury to date. And so just think about this. So he, at this point, has been in the league for 10 years, 11 years. And his longest injury to date has about for 2 weeks. That's pretty insane. And so again, we see Saturn here causing injuries of like wear and tear, right? He's always using his knees, and whatnot, and he injures them. But the injury is not that bad. It's reduced in its capacity by the south node, and it's aided in its recovery by the enclosure from the benefics. And so, so that would be the Saturn return. So the 2016 finals, we talked about this in the Perfections video as well. He leads the Cavs to a finals win over the 73-9 Warriors. That was the best, still is the best regular season record of all time. After going down 3-1 in the first 4 games. So I think they lose the first 2, win the third, and then lose the fourth. And then he leads this like absolutely ridiculous 3-game streak where he comes back and wins the series. And so again, Saturn here is kind of responsible for bringing into action the demands of Jupiter and the Sun for victories, for conquests, for whatever. And Saturn's actually in a better condition, I would maybe argue, than both of them, maybe not quite the Sun. But Saturn is in a position where, because of his, again, relationship with Mars, the south node, and the enclosure, is able to bring their demands into action. So this is a Capricorn year where both of those planets are also activated. And it's a Gemini month for this entire month, so Mercury's activated as well. And this was like a really big deal. I think this was the first, it was the first time Cleveland had won a championship since like the 50s or 60s. And it like proved kind of to the world that LeBron could win more or less on his own without this like complete super team. And he like redeems himself. He redeems his honor. His reputation is healed. He's, all these kinds of things. It's also interesting too, again, like he's facing the Warriors with, Saturn in Scorpio, and the Warriors end up really kind of like foiling him, where I think they play each other like 3 or 4 times in a row and he only wins the one. And so again, it's these burdens, these challenges. He's coming up against this brick wall of the Golden State Warriors, Mars, but he's able to overcome them at least briefly. And then there's the 2020 NBA Finals, where it's just activated by month. But so this is COVID year. They delay the playoffs and the finals until the fall. But he ends up winning with Los Angeles, and he at this point really like solidifies his record as like potential greatest of all time kind of a thing. By winning with his 3rd team, he's one of the very few players to win NBA Finals with 3 teams. But yeah, so he wins his 4th Finals MVP, and it's just, again, Saturn is this planet that can give him the ability to like win and conquer Mars and Mars' sign over a long period of time and bring the desires and aims of Jupiter and the Sun into the life. So this is just a fairly long quote about how he takes care of his body. So this is another kind of Saturn in the 6th thing, when it's well placed, is this attention and care to injury, to preventing injury to the body. So he says, he's asked, I didn't finish I gotta proofread these things more. But he's asked by a reporter how he beats Father Time, how he's beaten Father Time, and this is pretty recent. This is like in the fall. And he says it hasn't changed, and like just that question alone is like how he beats Father Time. Like, come on. It hasn't changed. I've just learned more about my body and how to prepare my body, but I've been taking care of my body since I started playing basketball. Even when I was younger, you can ask any of my best friends growing up. Before I went to sleep, I would stretch, and as soon as I would wake up, I would stretch. I was like 10 years old. In high school, I was one of the few guys that would ice after the game. Ice is a Saturnian thing. It's fixed water, right? Saturn and Scorpio. After the game, my rookie year, I was icing after the game as well. But as I got older and older, I started to figure out other ways that I could beat Father Time by putting in more time on my game and on my craft. Like, come on. But mostly on my body and my mind. I feel like if my mind can stay as fresh as it possibly can through a grueling up and down NBA season, which it is, grueling, this is again a Saturn word, it's an onslaught, it's an endurance test, it's a marathon, right? Then my body is going to be able to try and perform at the highest level. So I've always wanted to maximize even the most out of my career and squeeze the most juice I can out of my career. I'm having a good race with Father Time right now, as you can see from some of the commercials. I feel like I'm winning. And so he recently did a commercial with like, it's like a soap deodorant commercial or something. I can't remember, but he did a commercial and someone, it was like him confronting Father Time. I can't remember what it was. My eyes are like watering. And so he's got this incredible longevity, again, from the benefic enclosure, from the south node. It's reducing the effects of injury and time on his body. And so I have 3 graphs here, just to sort of wrap up, of his like scoring numbers over the years. And so he's the red line here, and this one's kind of hard to tell compared to the other 2. But the point is that his line stays like almost straight, right? So that would be a straight line. And so he is almost straight. And so if we see here, and he's red, LeBron. And so we see Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the previous scoring record guy, his line goes a little bit more like that. Over the course of his career, it goes down. We see Michael Jordan's, again, goes down, and he's got a much shorter career. And at this point, he's got a couple of years even added on to this. And then we see Kobe. Kobe's goes way up, stays consistent for a while, and then goes way down. And so we see, like, this is insane. Just the level of consistency and longevity. And it's brought about, again, by this. He doesn't get injured. He's injured. Actually, it's kind of funny. He's injured right now with probably the most severe injury of his career. He might have to have like foot surgery. Which kind of funny, Mars in Pisces in his birth chart, right? And then Saturn enters Pisces in foot. But anyway, so just this ridiculously consistent, like straight scoring line. It's like unprecedented, like completely unprecedented. And so this is a different graph that, in my opinion, is a little bit more clear. So you see, he's never like, he's scoring less for a lot of his career than, especially Jordan. Like Jordan is scoring more than him for his whole career, but Jordan's just like this cannon. Like his career is like 13 years long. It's way shorter. But like, just like, what the hell? It's like going up almost. And so it's insane. Just again, the consistency and the longevity. This is all Saturn in Scorpio. And then again, same thing. This is just in all of his games, 1,363 games. This is like a ridiculous amount of games. Look at this. Just, it's literally a straight line. So from like, what is this? Like 2000, some of the years. But so let's say he starts in 2003. So like, and he's red. So 2003, 4, 5, 2006 to like today. Oh, actually, this isn't years. So this is his pretty much whole career. So from like 2006 to today, he's scoring almost the exact same. Like he goes up a little bit, and then he goes down a little bit, and then he goes back up. And it's like his 20th year in the league. He's having like his second best scoring ever. So like his highest is in his like 3rd season. He's got like 33 points a game. His 20th year, he's got like 31 points a game. What? So that's Saturn and Scorpio. So this is actually a really interesting chart of where it's got good malefics, or at least a really good malefic in Saturn. And then Mars too. Mars is very angular. And so we see this is a case where the malefics are giving good things that the benefics like aren't quite. The benefic, he's not getting like that final little glory like trophy from Jupiter all the time, especially early in his career. But he's just got this incredible longevity, and he's just like a freak of nature. But it's actually not nature; it's attention to detail, right? Like we said, attention to his body, attention to the state of affairs, and how he's able to like fluidly relate to the world. And he's using, literally, I didn't realize that until I was reading it for this video. He's literally using fixed water to heal his body. Like what the hell? So that's that. That's the end of the video. If you want to support the channel, you can go find me on Twitter. You can book a reading with me, and you can also find me on Patreon. I've just released a new tier on Patreon for $1 a month, where you can get my weekly and monthly forecasts, because I want those to be available to people. So if you're liking the video, go check that out. Yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.